She hasn't visited once in 3 years, Mr. Calloway. Not once. She abandoned them when they needed her most, and now she wants half of everything they left behind. My brother didn't even lower his voice when he said it. He sat across the conference table from me with his hands folded like a man delivering a sermon, and he looked directly at the estate attorney, not at me, as though I wasn't in the room, as though I was already invisible. I didn't flinch. I checked my phone. 4 minutes. That's how long it would take for the email I'd scheduled to arrive in Mr. Calloway's inbox. I set my phone face down on the table and waited. Have you ever sat in a room and listened to someone rewrite your entire life with a straight face? Not just lie, perform, with grief in their eyes and sorrow in their voice, and just enough hesitation to seem like the words cost them something? Drop a yes in the comments if you've ever had someone look straight at you and manufacture a version of you that never existed. I want to know how many of us have survived this. My brother straightened his tie. He was wearing the same navy suit he'd worn to our mother's funeral 6 months earlier. He'd cried at the service, full tears, trembling lip, hand pressed against the casket. Our aunts had held him up on both sides. I had stood 3 feet away and watched him perform grief he didn't feel for a woman he hadn't visited in 8 months. I knew because I had the receipts, every single one. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old. I'm a software engineer. And for the last 4 years, I have been the invisible thread holding my family's finances together from 700 miles away. I relocated to Austin for work when I was 27. My brother Daniel, 34, perpetually between opportunities, stayed in Columbus, near our parents. He positioned this as sacrifice, devotion, the good child who stayed while the ambitious one ran. What he was actually doing was positioning himself. Our mother passed away in March after 18 months of declining health. Our father had passed 2 years before her. What they left behind was a paid-off house in Bexley, worth roughly $480,000, a modest investment account with around $310,000, and a life insurance policy that named both of us equally as beneficiaries. About $900,000 total, split 2 ways. Or so I thought. 3 weeks after the funeral, Mr. Calloway, our parents' estate attorney, sent me a letter. He was required by law to notify me that a will reading had been scheduled. He was also required to inform me that there had been a recent amendment to the estate documents, an amendment made 14 months ago, while our mother was still alive. The amendment removed my name from the investment account entirely and gave Daniel sole discretion over the disbursement of the house proceeds. I read that letter sitting in my car in a parking garage in Austin, and I felt something cold and very precise settle in my chest. Not panic, not grief, something closer to clarity. Because I had been expecting this. Not the exact form of it, not the specific legal mechanism, but the intent, yes. I had seen it coming for almost 2 years. It started small, the way these things always do. A comment here, a suggestion there, my brother calling me on Sunday evenings, not to talk, but to report. Mom was confused again today. She called me by Uncle Raymond's name 3 times. Dad forgot where he put his keys for the 2nd time this week. I'm worried, Maya. I really am. They need more consistent support than you can give from Texas. I listened. I asked questions. I sent money every month, $1,500, then $2,000 to cover supplemental care costs. My brother said insurance wasn't covering. I flew home 4 times in 14 months. I set up video calls with my mother every Tuesday and Thursday evening. I researched memory care specialists and emailed my brother the contact information. And every single time I did any of this, I documented it. Not because I was suspicious at first. I documented it because I am a software engineer who grew up in a house where nothing was ever written down and miscommunications caused damage that lasted decades. Documentation was instinct. But around month 8, something shifted. My mother mentioned on a Tuesday call that Daniel had been asking her about the will. Casually, she said. Just making sure everything was organized. She laughed it off. I didn't. I started paying closer attention. Month 10. My mother mentioned signing some papers Daniel had brought over. She couldn't remember exactly what they were. He'd explained them, but she'd been tired that day, and she trusted him. Month 11. I noticed the supplemental care money I'd been sending wasn't appearing in the household account I had view-only access to. It was being received, I had the transfer confirmations, but it wasn't landing where it should. Month 12. I hired a forensic accountant. Quietly. I told no one. What she found took another 6 weeks to fully map. My brother had obtained a power of attorney over both financial accounts, not through obvious forgery, but through documents our mother had signed while she was fatigued and likely not fully tracking the implications. He had used those documents to redirect funds. Not dramatically, carefully. $3,000 here, $5,000 there. Always below the threshold that triggers automatic alerts. Always timed around periods when our mother was having difficult days. Over 22 months, he had moved $187,000 out of our parents' accounts into a personal checking account he'd opened under the name of his girlfriend's LLC. I had the map, every transfer, every originating IP address, every timestamp. But if I froze the accounts right then, it would be a civil matter, a family dispute. He would lawyer up, cry poverty, claim the POA authorized everything, and walk away with a slap. He'd be back in 6 months with a new scheme and a sharper attorney. I needed him to go further. I needed him to commit to the con so completely that there was no walking it back. So I waited. I kept sending my $2,000 a month. I kept calling my mother on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I kept letting him believe I was oblivious. And then our mother passed, and I flew home for the funeral, and I stood 3 feet from my brother while he wept into his hands, and I said nothing. I held the information like a stone in my pocket, heavy, smooth, patient. 3 weeks later, I received Mr. Calloway's letter about the amendment. That was when I knew it was time. The conference room at Calloway and Associates was on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown. It had a long oak table, 4 leather chairs, a window that looked out over the Columbus skyline, and the particular silence of a room where a great deal of money had changed hands over the years. I arrived 12 minutes early. I set a single gray folder on the table in front of my chair. I poured myself a glass of water. I sat down and I breathed. Daniel arrived 7 minutes later with his attorney, a man named Price, mid-50s, expensive shoes, the look of someone who had successfully intimidated a lot of people in rooms like this one. My brother glanced at my folder and then at me, and something flickered in his expression. Not worry. Confidence. He thought the folder was theater. He thought I had printed out some emails and convinced myself they amounted to something. He sat down. He folded his hands. He waited for Mr. Calloway. When the attorney entered and settled himself at the head of the table, Daniel began before anyone had spoken a formal word. I want to be transparent from the start, he said. His voice was measured, sorrowful, exactly calibrated. This is painful for me. Maya is my sister. But I have a responsibility to honor what our parents actually wanted, and what they wanted is clearly documented in the amended estate filing. Mr. Calloway nodded and opened his folder. Before we review the documents, Daniel continued, I think it's important that you understand the context. Mr. Calloway, Maya relocated to Texas 4 years ago. After that, her involvement in our parents' lives became minimal. He paused, as though the word cost him. I was the one managing their appointments, their medications, their finances. I was the one driving them to treatment. I was the one who was actually present. Our parents made their decision based on that reality. I looked at him. I kept my face empty. No anger, no hurt, no reaction at all. I have been practicing this my entire adult life. I grew up with a brother who ran on drama and reaction, who escalated every conversation until someone broke, and then used the breaking as proof that they were unstable. I learned early that the most devastating thing you can do to someone like that is simply refuse to perform for them. He glanced at me, looking for the flinch. I gave him nothing. Miss Maya? Mr. Calloway said, turning to me with the careful neutrality of a man who had seen enough estate disputes to keep all his opinions internal. Your brother has raised some significant points regarding your level of involvement in your parents' care during their final years. Before we proceed to the documents, do you have anything you'd like to say? Daniel leaned back slightly. He was ready for me to protest, ready for the emotion, the defensiveness, the list of excuses. I picked up my water glass. I took a slow sip. I set it back down. Not yet, I said. I'd like to hear the rest first. Daniel's attorney, Price, wrote something on his legal pad. My brother cleared his throat. I have documentation, he said, and he slid a bound folder across the table toward Mr. Calloway. A caregiving log I maintained over the past 2.5 years. Dates, times, activities, every appointment, every grocery run, every medication refill. You'll notice Maya's name appears a total of 9 times over 31 months, 9 visits. He looked at me then, and there was something in his eyes I can only describe as satisfaction. While I was there, every single week, Mr. Calloway paged through the log slowly. His expression remained unreadable, but he lingered on certain pages. I watched him. This is quite comprehensive, the attorney said. I take my responsibilities seriously, my brother said. Across the table, Price nodded like a man watching a chess game go according to plan. My brother sat with his hands folded and let the silence do the work. He thought this was his closing argument. He thought the log was the nail. He had spent a great deal of time on that log. I know because the forensic accountant I hired also recovered the metadata from the document file. It had been created 11 months ago and edited 23 times. The dates went back 2.5 years, but the file itself was less than a year old. I already knew about the log before I walked into that room. She hasn't been present, Daniel said, his voice softening into something that resembled sadness. And I'm not saying that to hurt her. I'm saying it because it's the truth, and our parents knew it was the truth, and that's why they made the choices they made. They trusted the person who showed up. Mr. Calloway set the caregiving log down and looked at me. Miss Maya, this document raises some questions about— I understand, I said. May I? I opened my gray folder. I slid a single printed page across the table, a one-page summary document, formatted cleanly, with a QR code at the bottom. That's a summary of a digital archive, I said. The QR code links to a secured cloud folder. Inside that folder is 31 months of records. Mr. Calloway looked at the page. Every video call I made to my mother is logged with a timestamp, duration, and screen-captured thumbnail. There are 241 calls, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 7 p.m. Central, almost without exception. My mother and I spoke for an average of 34 minutes per call. I paused. She knew my voice. She knew my face. Distance is not the same as absence. The room was very quiet. There are also 47 months of bank transfer records showing $1,500 to $2,000 per month sent to the household account, totaling approximately $79,000 over that period. Wire confirmations are included. I turned to the second page in my folder and slid it across. And there are 4 sets of flight records, hotel receipts, and pharmacy receipts from my in-person visits. I was there in April 2 years ago for 12 days when my father's condition worsened. I was there last November for Thanksgiving. I was there in February, 6 weeks before my mother passed, when her doctor wanted a second opinion on her care plan. I coordinated that appointment remotely and flew in for the consultation. I looked at my brother. His expression had not changed, but something behind his eyes had shifted. 9 visits, he said, his voice steady. That's what the log shows. Your log, I said, shows 9. Mine shows something different. The discrepancy is interesting. I tapped the QR code page. The archive is time-stamped and encrypted. It's also been submitted as a notarized exhibit to the court, filed this morning. Price looked up sharply. What court? I'll get to that, I said. Mr. Calloway was no longer pretending to be neutral. He was leaning forward. He scanned the summary page again, and then he looked at my brother with an expression I recognized from every teacher, every supervisor, every authority figure who had ever caught someone in a slow and careful construction of a lie. Daniel turned to Price. Something passed between them that wasn't words. The caregiving log is a secondary matter, Price said, recovering quickly. The central issue is the amended estate documents, which are legally executed and clearly express. I'd like to address the amendment, my brother interrupted, finding his footing again. He reached into the folder in front of him and slid a document across the table. This is the amended power of attorney and estate modification, signed by our mother, notarized, dated 14 months ago. He looked at me. She was of sound mind. She made this decision freely. She trusted me with the estate because I was here, and this document is valid. Mr. Calloway examined it. His frown deepened. The signature appears authentic, he said. It is authentic, my brother said. She signed it. Maya can dispute it all she wants, but that is our mother's signature. That is her choice. He spread his hands. What more is there to say? Price nodded. The document is executed correctly, witnessed and notarized. There is no legal basis to challenge the amendment on procedural grounds. I watched my brother settle back into his chair. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has just made his opponent's best move irrelevant. He thought the document was his kill shot. He thought the notarization closed the door. He forgot what I do for a living. I work in software infrastructure. Before I moved to Austin, I spent 3 years doing compliance auditing for a financial services firm. I know what a clean document looks like. I know what a retroactively constructed document looks like. And I know exactly how to tell the difference when you have access to the right tools. The signature is real, I said. I'm not disputing the signature. My mother did sign something 14 months ago. What she signed is the question. I slid a second document from my folder, this one thicker, with tabbed sections. This is an expert analysis from a document forensics specialist. She examined the original filing submitted to the court last week, the physical document, not a copy, and found several anomalies. I opened to the first tab section. The ink on the signature line is 14 months old. The ink on the body of the document, the paragraphs that grant my brother sole discretion and remove my name from the investment account, is between 3 and 5 months old. The room went silent in a particular way. The kind of silence that has weight. The pages were separated, I continued. My mother signed a signature page. The content pages were replaced after the fact. The notary sealed the signature page, not the full document. The current binding is approximately 4 months old based on adhesive analysis. I turned to the second tab section. The forensic specialist's full report is here, including methodology and chain of custody documentation. A copy was filed with the probate court this morning as a supplemental exhibit. Price stood up. That analysis is inadmissible. Without proper... It was submitted with a full credentials disclosure and accepted for the preliminary record, I said. You're welcome to challenge it, but the court has already reviewed the filing. My brother's mouth was open slightly. He closed it. He looked at Price, and for the first time, Price did not look back at him with reassurance. This is fabricated, my brother said. His voice had changed. The grief performance was gone. What was underneath was harder and less controlled. She hired someone to manufacture this because she's angry she's been cut out. She's been resentful for years. Daniel. Price put a hand on his arm. But my brother was already leaning forward. She never came home. She sent money because it was easier than actually showing up, and now she wants to be rewarded for that? Our parents knew who was really there. This is exactly the kind of manipulation. The probate court filing, I said calmly, includes a second component. He stopped. I slid the third document from my folder. This one had a blue cover sheet, 22 months of financial records from the household accounts our parents maintained. I had view-only access to these accounts beginning 3 years ago when our father asked me to help monitor for billing errors. I opened the cover. Over 22 months, $187,000 was transferred from those accounts to a checking account held by Meridian Home Services, LLC. That LLC was registered in Ohio 14 months ago. The registered agent is your girlfriend, Daniel. Her home address is the business address. The LLC has no employees, no website, no business license for any services it claims to provide. The silence was different now. The transfers were made in amounts between $2,000 and $8,000. Never more. Time during weeks when our mother was having difficult days and was less likely to review her statements carefully. The originating device for 61 of the 67 transfers was a laptop registered to you. The IP address matches your home network. I looked at him. I tracked every dollar. My brother had gone very still. If you had stopped at a smaller amount, I said, it would have been difficult to prosecute. A family member with POA making questionable transfers, that's a civil dispute. Attorney's fees, maybe a settlement, maybe nothing. I want you to understand why I didn't freeze the accounts earlier. I needed the total to cross the federal threshold for wire fraud. I needed the transfers to cross state lines, which they did when funds were moved through a regional bank with processing centers in Michigan and Indiana. I closed the folder. The mandatory minimum for federal wire fraud is not negotiable. You're lying, he said. It wasn't a confident denial. It was the sound of a man trying to find solid ground and not finding any. A copy of this financial analysis, with the complete forensic accounting report from the specialist I retained 18 months ago, was submitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Ohio 9 weeks ago, I said. The investigation has been open since then. Price had stopped writing. He was looking at my brother with an expression that had migrated from professional neutrality to something close to alarm. You've been under federal investigation for 9 weeks, I said. The preliminary findings were sufficient for a sealed indictment filed last Thursday. I received notification of that filing this morning. My brother pushed back from the table. He stood up. He was breathing hard and fast, and his hands were flat on the table, and he was looking at me the way people look when a room they thought they understood has rearranged itself completely. You set me up, he said. I documented you, I said. There's a difference. Everything you did, you chose to do. I just made sure there was a record. You're my sister. You stole $187,000 from our parents while they were sick and dying, I said. My voice was even. And then you tried to erase me from the estate so you could take the rest. I don't know what word you'd use for that, but the word I use is not family. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. I also want to be transparent, I said, turning back to Mr. Calloway, who had not moved, about one more item. I slid the last document from my folder, a single page, much shorter than the others. The house at 4417 Elm Grove Road. I've been paying the property taxes on that house for the last 2 years. My brother stopped paying them 14 months ago, which coincides with when the POA was filed and the transfers began. The back taxes total $11,400. I paid them last month to prevent the county from filing a lien. I set the page down. I have a valid legal claim against the estate for reimbursement of those tax payments, which I am prepared to file if necessary. But what I would actually prefer is for Mr. Calloway to recommend to the court that the amended estate documents be voided on the basis of fraudulent modification, that the estate be distributed according to the original will, and that the $187,000 in transferred funds be treated as an advance against my brother's share pending the outcome of the federal investigation. Mr. Calloway had his pen in his hand, but he wasn't writing. He was just looking at me. I have spent 2 years building this record, I said. I flew home 4 times. I called my mother 241 times. I sent nearly $80,000 in household support. I did not disappear. I was never absent. I was quiet, and there is a significant difference. I closed my folder. I'd like my mother's estate distributed the way she originally intended, before someone convinced her to sign a page she didn't fully understand. The door to the conference room opened. 2 men in plain clothes entered and stood just inside the doorframe. One of them held up a badge. "Daniel," one of them said, "we have a warrant." My brother turned toward the door. He turned back toward me. He looked at Price, who was already gathering his papers with the brisk efficiency of an attorney who has just mentally reclassified a client from retained to former. "You planned all of this," my brother said. His voice was quiet now. Something had left it the performance, the architecture of the grieving devoted son. What remained was just a person who understood they had been running toward a wall for a very long time and had just arrived at it from the beginning. "You just let it happen. You made choices," I said. "I made plans." He looked at me for a long moment. There was something in his expression I hadn't expected. Not just anger, not just fear. Something that might have been buried under everything else. A kind of recognition. As though some part of him had always known who I actually was and had gambled anyway. "You're going to feel guilty about this," he said. Eventually, I thought about our mother. I thought about the Tuesday and Thursday phone calls, her voice some weeks sharp and bright and laughing, and other weeks slower, softer, fading at the edges like a photograph left in the sun. I thought about the February visit when she'd held my hand for a long time and said she was glad I'd come, and I hadn't told her what I knew because I didn't want her last months colored by that betrayal. I had carried it for her. I had kept it quiet and built the case in the background and let her go peacefully without knowing what her son had done. "No," I said. "I won't." He left between the 2 men. Price followed without looking at me. Mr. Calloway sat at the head of the table for a moment after the room cleared. He looked at my gray folder. He looked at the documents spread across the oak table. He looked at me. "Miss Maya," he said, "I'm going to need some time to review all of this properly." "Of course," I said. "Everything is in the archive. You have the QR code." He nodded slowly. "Your parents, did they know what you were doing?" I thought about this. My father suspected something was wrong before he passed. He told me once, on the phone, that he was worried about things getting complicated after he was gone. I told him I would handle it. I stood up and picked up my folder. I don't think he knew the scope of it, but I think he trusted me, and that matters more to me than most things. I walked out of the conference room and took the elevator down to the lobby and pushed through the glass doors into a gray Columbus afternoon. The air smelled like rain and cut grass and the particular cold of a Midwestern April. And I stood on the sidewalk and did not cry, which surprised me for a moment, and then did not surprise me at all. I thought about my mother's handwriting, the shape of her capital letters, the way she always underlined things she wanted to remember. She had been a careful woman, a deliberate woman. She had raised a daughter who documented everything, and a son who assumed that effort was the same as weakness, and she had not known until it was too late which of those things would matter more. I took out my phone. I deleted my brother's number. I called my mother's best friend, who had been with her through the diagnosis and the decline and the end, and I told her that things were moving forward, and she cried a little, and I thanked her for being one of the people who had always known the truth without needing me to prove it. Then I stood there another minute in the April cold and let myself feel, just for a moment, the full weight of 2 years of patience. Of $80,000 sent quietly into accounts I was not sure were being used correctly. Of 241 Tuesday and Thursday phone calls. Of flights booked on 4 days' notice and forensic accountants and encrypted archives and sealed indictments and a gray folder set down on a conference table at the exact right moment. It had cost something. These things always do. But I thought about what it would have cost to do nothing, to let the performance win, to let the version of me that Daniel had narrated the absent daughter, the cold one, the one who chose ambition over family, become the official record. To let our parents' life savings disappear into an LLC with no employees and a girlfriend's name on the registration, and to stand at the estate reading with nothing but my own word against a carefully constructed lie. No, some costs are worth it. The thing no one tells you about being methodical is that it feels like losing for a long time. When you're building the record instead of screaming, when you're tracking the transfers instead of confronting him at Thanksgiving dinner, when you're flying home quietly and saying nothing and absorbing every sideways comment about your absence without defending yourself, it looks, from the outside, exactly like surrender. It isn't surrender, it's foundation. By the time you lay it down, it holds everything. I walked to my car. I drove to the house I'd grown up in, the house on Elm Grove Road, and I sat in the driveway for a while. The oak tree in the front yard had lost most of its winter bark and was just beginning to push new growth. My mother had planted that tree the year I was born. She had a photograph of it at 6 inches tall, her kneeling next to it in gardening gloves, grinning like she'd accomplished something enormous. She had. I went inside and I opened every window because the house needed air, and I made a cup of tea in my mother's kitchen, using her kettle and her mugs, and her brand of tea she'd ordered from the same company for 20 years. And I sat at the kitchen table where I'd done homework and fought with my brother and eaten 10,000 meals. And I was quiet for a while. There was a lot still to do. Legal proceedings, estate administration, the sale of the house, or the decision not to sell it. Phone calls and paperwork and the long bureaucratic work of closing out a life. Months of it, probably. But that afternoon, in the kitchen that smelled like her, I let myself be still. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not absence. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is the sound of someone building something that cannot be argued with, something that doesn't need to raise its voice because the evidence speaks so clearly that no performance in the world can compete with it. My brother had spent 2 years telling a story about me. I spent 2 years building a record. In the end, only one of those things walked out of that conference room intact. Peace is not given to you. You do not inherit it, and you cannot borrow it, and no one will hand it to you out of fairness or decency or love. You construct it, carefully, over time, from the decisions you make when it would have been easier to explode. I built mine over 2 years of early Tuesday mornings and encrypted folders and flights home and patience I didn't always feel but chose anyway. I sat in my mother's kitchen and drank my tea and watched the oak tree move in the April wind. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't have to be strategic. I didn't have to track anything. I didn't have to keep anything quiet. I just got to sit there. And it was enough.